Don't think you ever have product market fit, and you will continue to have product market fit because the market with dynamics, whether it's macroeconomic environment or other businesses coming into the space, what is product market fit today is going to change 5 or 6 times over the next however many years. So I feel like you're constantly looking for product market fit and maintaining product market fit. And for me, that is when customers are using your product, happily paying for it, telling other people that it's amazing, they should be using it. So referrals is a really good, strong sign. And I also think just genuinely getting something out of the software. So the software is not just sitting there as a nice to have. So I think things like that, to me, are early signals of that customer love.
We are lucky enough to have Carla Penn-Kahn, the co-founder of Profit Peak, with us today on The First. From the first time I met Carla, I was blown away at her sheer level of domain expertise and determination to solve for her customers' pain points. That really only comes with operators or founders who have been there before. We talked through her experience building and exiting businesses before her first foray into a venture-backed business with Profit Peak, how she approaches founder-led sales, her thoughts on being what some would say a non-technical founder, and how she ran her fundraising process. This episode is one full of back-to-back learnings and insights that are invaluable for early-stage founders listening. Enjoy.
Carla, welcome to The First podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I think as a start, maybe for the audience, if you could give a high-level overview of what Profit Peak is, customers, what the software is, markets, etc.
Sure. So Profit Peak is basically a light ERP, an operating platform to help e-commerce businesses focus more on profitability and scaling their businesses for profitable outcomes. We have customers across Australia, Southeast Asia, and the US, and we're in beta, just basically finding our feet.
Awesome. And let's start with a bit of background here, just to set some context. I want to start with a bit of a weird question, but for some reason I know your first words, and those were OCBC. Do you want to maybe explain why those might have been your first words?
Yes. So I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. My mother was a coder in the 80s, back when typically females didn't go into engineering backgrounds. And she developed one of the first banking treasury softwares in the world. And head office was here in Singapore. And so OCBC was one of my first words. They were doing a deal, obviously.
Awesome. And so maybe let's unpack that a bit as well, because you've had fairly interesting experience before Profit Peak. And let's take a major step back and talk through, I guess, that upbringing, because, me and you have talked about this from time to time, and it feels like, entrepreneurship was sort of in your blood in some ways. And you had a set weekly discussion, I think, with the family where you talked about business and detail. Do you want to maybe expand on that?
Yeah. So my entire family have always been really focused on entrepreneurship. My great-grandmother in the 1940s actually was an entrepreneur. She had a retail store in South Africa. In the 1940s, it was really uncommon for women to even work, never mind have their own business. So it's really something that's probably ingrained in me. She was an influence on my life. Her son was my grandfather and then my dad's dad. And so dinners as a family with my dad and his 3 brothers and all the kids was my grandfather saying, like a boardroom meeting, hey, how's business? How's business? Are you making money? Are you making money? And so I grew up really always thinking about how I was going to make my mark in the family as a businesswoman.
And did that mean as you finished high school, you went to university, that there was always going to be somewhere in your professional arc in your mind starting a business? Was that spark there then from that point onwards?
Absolutely. So I always knew I was going to go to university, tick that box, show my parents that private school education was actually worth something, other than a lot of wasted money, after tax money too.
Yep.
And so I always knew I was going to go into business. I didn't know what. And my parents always told me that I needed to get some really good foundation, a lot of operational knowledge, a lot of business knowledge before I actually went out on my own. But even when I was 14 and 9 months, to the day, I was like, all right, here's my CV, printing it. And I literally walked around Chatswood Shopping Centre, which was my local Westfield, handing out my resume and literally had a job the next weekend. So I've always been very driven by work.
We speak to a lot of founders on the show, and some of them go into more of the corporate roles, whether it's legal or whether it's banking. Some grow to hate it very quickly and then go to be a founder. Some sort of get comfortable in that and spend 5, 6, 7 years. For yourself, do you want to expand? Because you moved into banking post-university. Do you want to expand on that and like maybe how that kind of led to an interest in e-commerce?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't finish university and then go into banking. I did a summer internship at Credit Suisse.
Yep.
On the last day, they were like, hey, have you thought about staying on full time and doing university on the side? And I was like, I'm not too sure about that. And then they handed me the contract. And as a 19-year-old, I looked at the number and went, yeah, I think I can do both.
Yeah.
I can definitely live at home, earn this salary, and somehow study. And I was always an overworker by nature. So when I did my first year of university, I actually did 5 subjects, not 4 each semester. So I'd really accelerated my degree and was going to try and finish in 2. So I literally just then had a mindset change on how I was going to do that and did both. But I ended up working at Credit Suisse for probably 6 years. And the whole time I was working there, I was thinking about what's an opportunity, like what's next. I was never really like, I'm settled, I'm happy. I knew that this was a stepping stone. And I got to work with a lot of incredible companies and ultra high net worth individuals who obviously were doing exactly where I wanted to be. And so I worked on the Maya float. It was the last deal I did on the ASX listing. We went on roadshow with Bernie Brooks, and I was helping put together strategy on why Maya needed to be online. And needless to say, Maya didn't really think they needed to be online back then. This was 2011.
Awesome. And do you think that experience, well, even the Maya transaction itself, but do you think that banking experience kind of lends itself to being a founder? Are there certain kind of qualities in that experience that help?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of qualities that help. I mean, I was exposed to M&A. Ultimately, raising capital was part of what I was exposed to. I was also very financially driven in all my decision making. I did a lot of quant work, so running models in Excel is native to me, and so I've always operated my businesses with a real financial lens.
Awesome. And doing a fair bit of LinkedIn stalking, there's a couple of early trials at e-commerce, notably e-farmers market, and then a gift worth giving. Do you want to maybe kind of expand on those a bit more detail?
Yeah, so I've always been passionate about food. And so I always thought, how do I combine enterprise with what I love, being food? So the first thing I thought of was, hey, why don't we digitalize farmers markets? In hindsight, the worst idea ever, because back in 2011, Australia Post could barely deliver an envelope, never mind perishables or glass. So it was a flawed business model from day one. My parents told me exactly that, and I was like, I'm going to prove you wrong. It only took me 12 months to be proven wrong. But I left that as like a stepping stone. So I don't look at failures as failures. I see them as stepping stones and reasons to push ahead. And so on the back of that, I acquired a gift worth giving, which was a hamper business. And we ended up scaling it and actually selling it to another hamper business. So it was a good starting point to like dip our toe in the water without going crazy in terms of a financial investment or inventory, which became a big part of our next business.
And so you were full-time by this stage. You were actually running these things. You'd left CS. Okay. And so when did, I guess, Everton start? Like when was that arc kind of kicking off? Was it whilst you were still finishing up on a prior business, or it was like take some time off and then really go for it?
Oh, no, I don't take time off.
I was going to say, I knew that was going to be the response.
Time off's not my thing. Like I never did a gap year or anything like that. But I was doing a gift worth giving. And then we saw Everton was a business that was up for sale. It was the very first homewares e-commerce business in Australia. So they'd gotten it to a point where they no longer understood how to scale it to the next level. And I looked at the financials and went, great, it makes money. It appears to be a good business model. We can plug this into the hamper business and significantly scale overnight for not a huge capital outlay. And that's exactly what we did.
It sounds as if like you were trying to win at specific categories in a way. Like even when I was doing the research, I mean, even the quality food, like that seems well ahead of its time if we think of like what's happening now, I guess, within the e-commerce ecosystem. But was there any motivation around kitchenware as a category? Did you think that was like a win-at category at the time that was just underpenetrated?
I love cooking and I love food is the simple, honest answer. So I was like, if I'm going to be the face of a brand, like I always wanted to be something that's genuine to me and my interests. And then you don't feel like it's a hard sell, it's an easy sell. It's a bit the same with Profit Peak. It comes naturally to me, the subject and the problem we're solving. So it was the same for kitchenware. If I could spend all my time in my kitchen, I would.
But if we sort of go back to that time period, I mean, it seems obvious now, e-commerce, but I remember meeting founders in that space even in 2013, 2014. And like e-commerce wasn't a slam dunk by any stretch in Australia. It was obvious it was going to get there, but it was still very nascent, right? The logistics and the infrastructure side in particular. And you hadn't operated a business at sort of scale in an e-commerce space previously. I mean, how was that experience of transitioning into something and then like you've acquired this business, this is yours? Like how do you go about actually making this your own and then starting to scale and learn about this?
Good question. And it's literally one foot in front of the other. It's a bit the same as now learning about like software as a service. It's just day by day, try and absorb as much information as you can, hire great people who know about the space. So one of the first hires we had was someone who'd come from a logistics background, for example, because if you're moving 20,000 SKUs across Australia, you need someone with a logistics background, and clearly that's not me. So it's really the same principles as doing any new business. It's day by day, hire the right people and learn as much as you can.
I read somewhere as well that I think it might have been with one of these businesses that it was with kitchenware, that you'd built up 60,000 loyal, I guess, enthusiasts around the brand. And I think that is like one of those things that's applicable to software and other verticals. Like, and this was at a time when maybe some of the social channels were a bit more nascent as well. How did you manage to pull that off?
Good question. I think it all comes back to community. If you are truly passionate as a founder about what you're doing, it's easy to find people with commonality in the passion that you have. And if you share genuine content that actually provides value to people, they follow along. And so I think those basic principles of just, hey, join our Facebook community on an email. And they were like, wow, are you going to help me like cook for my kids and give me inspiration on recipes and tell me how to use the products I've just spent $1,000 on? I'm signing up for it. And because it was the early days, we weren't competing with anyone. So it was unique. And also you got a lot of airtime in Facebook back 10 years ago when there wasn't a paid algorithm. Businesses got a lot of airtime, and especially private communities. One mum would share it with 5 other mums and it would just go viral.
What was the hardest thing in that first 12 to 24 months? Like what was the hardest thing to figure out that you can talk about looking back now?
The hardest thing was actually going back to like the relationship side of business. And it really built my skills in how to leverage what I know and change people's perspectives. Because back then there was a lot of protectionism around department stores and brands not wanting to go online to protect the department stores. There was a lot of fear in what will happen if they open up distribution to like an e-commerce retailer. And so when we started the business, we had very few people wanting to deal with us. And those first 12 to 24 months was about me making sure every single person who would listen to me would understand that they needed to do business with us. And by the end, there was not one person in our category that wasn't doing business with us. And it was like a highlight of my life at the time when someone would say no to me. And then 24 months later, they were calling and saying, can I take you out for lunch? And I was like, yes. But I played it cool.
How do you do that? I mean, because if you think about it, departments were so dominant in Australian retail at that time. And, with respect to what you guys were building, probably percentage points, if that, of their size, right?
Totally.
So how do you go about convincing someone to take that plunge?
Yeah, I think it's about relationship building. I think it's about building trust and saying, hey, you don't have to go crazy. Just dip your toe in the water. Give us a select number of products. See if we do the right thing. If we do, open it up. And also one thing I learned really, really early on in business is if you pay people on time or one day early, they love you. because the department stores don't pay on time,
Yeah.
or the department stores have the longest credit terms. So once we started paying people a day early, all of a sudden everyone wanted to do business with us.
Interesting.
So if we do a shift now to, you'd scaled Evident to quite a sizable business, and you'd obviously identified a number of different pain points which you were trying to solve for internally. Maybe if you could illustrate, what were some of the pain points that sort of led to ideating about early Profit Peak?
Sure. It was a really simple process because it was literally my own pain. And so I got the team in a boardroom who was relevant to all the pain points and literally whiteboarded. I need to know this, 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 and this. Now, who's going to tell me how I can understand this? It was literally that simple. And I just got blank faces. And I was like, how can you not tell me what's my most profitable product once it's been advertised? Like, how can we not know this? Like, that's the most basic financial question of a retailer. We should be able to know this in 5 seconds. So it became really, really clear to us that we were doing something that other people weren't yet thinking down the path of. And so we needed to solve it ourselves.
Was there a catalyst of like further competition in the market? Like, was this, if we think back to Amazon, right, and their entry to Australia, was this kind of coinciding with that as well?
I think there was a combination of factors. It was obviously post-COVID, so retail sales had started softening. We had margin pressures, we had increased competition, Amazon being one, but also brands that we were selling going direct to market.
Yeah.
So that was another pressure. But then there was the complexity, like the shift in the market. So no longer could you just pop up a random creative on Meta and get a return on your investment. And also the customer journey had changed. So customers were no longer using one touch point to make a purchase. They were shopping across multiple touch points.
Interesting. I think like one of the reasons, I mean, we started talking, last year about Profit Peak. And, I think one of the interesting things is founders that really feel the pain point before they start building. And we speak to a lot of founders that are in both camps, right? They could be, have really, really gone deep on the problem and come from that industry or vertical. But we also have founders that are building towards something that they believe is a problem. I just want to get your thoughts on that take, because it's something that people spend, especially on the investment side of things, spend a lot of time on thinking through. And that is, the founder that's deeply felt the pain point which they're trying to solve for versus a founder that's building towards a pain point that they may not have actually experienced themselves.
Yeah. So I've also had a couple of conversations with other founders on this topic when they ask me why I have so much conviction in what I'm doing. And I say, because if I can solve this problem for myself, I know I can solve it for other people. So that's where the conviction comes from. And I think the difference is that I do customer interviews and I did a lot of conversations, but I kept answering the question the same way that I had already answered it. So I feel like it almost accelerated our path to building a product in the sense that we knew what questions our customers needed answered because we needed them answered. So we just honed in on focusing on how do we answer these questions. We weren't looking for what kind of question do I need to ask my target customer to see if this is really a pain point for them. It was more verifying that, we're not the only person with this problem, which we knew. It was all over the media.
So maybe just taking a step back for a moment before we dive more into Profit Peak. You've built a pretty sizable business, one that is objectively successful, that you could probably run for a long time and sort of make that your life's work. What was the triggering point to decide, one, we may want to sell what we've built over the last 8 to 10 years, and then two, we want to retain this and we want to go start again? Like, walk us through that process, because it's not a super common occurrence, I would say, to go from general e-commerce into building something that's very software driven.
Yes, it literally happened by mistake. So we built the software for ourselves, and it was only when we started having conversations. I had 2 conversations, and both conversations with sizable Australian e-commerce brands ended with, I would pay for that. When can I get it? And I was like, okay, that's very keen.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's strong validation for what we have built internally. And I suppose it was the shift in the market that we felt coming. So we knew that our business model as we were operating it had no longer any moat around it. You know, anyone can sell kitchenware online. They can build up the distribution we have. They can get greater customer service, and Amazon is there. So we knew we had to either pivot and change our business model away from selling other people's brands to investing in our own brands, or we needed to go down looking at category acquisition and things like that. And so we literally, like you probably run your own ICs, we literally wrote down all the different business cases of where we were going to go next with the business, how much investment it would take. And at the end, we all said, are we done with this business? Like, have we seen it through as far as we can go? And we all just looked at each other and said, yeah, we're ready. And so that's when we went, all right, the best option now is to focus on Profit Peak and not take a break and not breathe.
Were there any, and when I think we should highlight for the audience as well, is like when you talk about we, it's also Dave as well, who's your co-founder. Were there any like areas of concern early on about just taking that leap from being like a deep e-commerce operator to then having to build out what is a software product? Were there any concerns around that, or was it just flat strap, we believe in this pain point and we can solve for it? We're just going to go all guns blazing at it?
So it was a very tight timeline. So we had discussions in August about what we were going to do next with the business to secure its moat and take it to the next level. And by that stage, we were already running Profit Peak internally. I'd had those 2 conversations with other retailers, and it was literally the next day that I picked up the phone to our competitor and said, hey, do you want to buy me? They said, absolutely. We signed a term sheet the next week. I think I met Alex the week after that. The business was sold 3 weeks after that with handover, clean walk out the door. And then we closed our round 2 months after that. So it's not like it was like a thought out long process. It was we're committing to this, we're doing it, let's just get it done, which is kind of my personality.
And let's we've actually raised this question a couple of times already with other founders, and I think some founders come from a highly technical background or product background. Some come from like a super commercial background. How do you think through? And again, we've spoken about this, so it won't offend you.
He's very worried about that.
Yeah. Being a non-technical founder, how did you feel about building out that kind of initial MVP of Profit Peak?
Yeah, I think it's an advantage for someone like myself not to be a technical founder, because I'm a just get it done type of person. If I was a technical founder, I probably wouldn't have thought out as much about meeting our customers' needs and actually solving the problem. And I would have just started building and just built and built and built and built and built and built. Whereas I don't have that luxury because I'm not a technical founder. So I really have to think about the problem space and how I make the numbers work before we actually start building. So I feel like while it's an advantage, it can also be a disadvantage. And we also have on our team from the e-commerce business great developers that we've worked with for the last 6 years that we entrust implicitly, who had already started building the software. So it was just a matter of saying to them, hey, we're all in on the software now. Don't even worry about the e-commerce side. You know, can't tell you anything yet, but just don't worry about it. Just make sure.
It'll be fine.
Yeah, just make sure that the checkout still works was basically the conversation.
Yeah. Do you want to maybe like highlight for the audience as well, just to give some context on your technical team, where they sit, etc.? I think that's interesting.
Sure. Yeah. So obviously I'm one of the co-founders, but my role at the moment is really product ownership and building a profile for the brand, as well as across everything financial, given my background. My husband is my co-founder. We've been together 21 years and second business together and haven't killed each other yet.
Quite the achievement.
Yeah, trust me, it is. But he is really around the customer side. So he is doing all the customer conversations and, you know, all the iteration process and sharing feedback with the team. Then we have a lead product designer. We also have... I'm trying to count because it keeps growing. We have 8 engineers. 3 of those engineers, though, have worked with us in our business prior. One of them 6 years, 4 years, and 2 years. So they're people we really trust and know, and they know our working style. They also know e-commerce. So we don't have to explain to them why we have to do something. They actually understand the business case because they saw the problems. And then we've grown the team from there and just added a data scientist on the team as well.
It's funny because from a commercial mindset, and you mentioned this, these ideas of like, how do we not understand this at like a SKU level profitability? It sounds so just simple and straightforward, but actually it is a highly complex problem to be able to show attribution all the way through to profitability on like a SKU level. And it's kind of like the golden goose if you can get to it, because it gives you such an advantage. And there's sort of been, I'd say, a progression in software that people have chipped away at it over and over. It's a relatively new category to actually get down to that level. How have you found it actually going and building this out? And I know you were running it already within Everton, but now to be able to scale something that you can sell to hundreds, if not thousands of customers over time.
I think you want a lot more than 100 customers, don't you?
We hope so.
Plan.
We'll start with 100.
Yeah, we'll work our way up.
Or maybe if it's like the Forbes 100 as the 100.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we meant.
But how has it been going from N=1 to now building a product that we're probably going to scale to thousands, if not tens of thousands of customers?
Yeah, sure. It's really about scalability, right? So for us, we've just gone through a database rebuild because we realized that the way we built the database the first time was great until we got to 10 customers, but it wasn't going to get us to 2,000 customers or then 10,000 customers. So it goes back to those basics of scalability because we are collecting so many data points and we're not stopping at a campaign or a channel level. We're actually going right down onto a SKU level. The number of data points and the amount of data that we're actually collecting is huge. But it's also a really good thing because as we take the business to the next level, the amount of data points that we have to start learning off is significantly higher than most operating softwares in the e-commerce space or even in other business spaces. So there's a lot of data to learn from. And it's really about like, I apply this to everything, one day at a time. You just push boundaries for that day and then you close the day out and then the next day you wake up and you push the boundaries again. That's just the way I work.
I think with this product, what makes it very interesting is there's a lot of adjacencies and you can make it overly complex in some ways. Like there's a lot of integrations, there's a lot of data pipelines. And I know that you've done a pretty incredible job at engaging early customers and building out a pipeline. But how do you prioritize that early customer feedback? And I know it is obviously still very early. But we speak to founders at the early stage. You have a very small product team who are doing founder-led sales, and then they have to provide focus for the team. Like, how do you kind of prioritize those requirements that are coming through from these early beta customers?
What's been really good is that most of the I needs are things we already knew we needed because they were things that we needed, but we hadn't yet built into that space. So there's no request that we really get unless they have their own setup not conforming to the norm, if that makes sense. So they may have a use case of Shopify, which is unique to their business. And then we have that conversation where we go, we'd love to help you, but we can't right now. And I've learnt very early on in my career, even back in Credit Suisse days, if someone's not your ideal customer, it's okay to say no. It's okay to say, we can't help you right now. So I said, I can't help you right now to 3 major brands in Australia, institutional brands, because we're not ready to help them yet. And if we went down the rabbit hole of helping each of those 3 brands, we wouldn't be able to focus on our core market and we wouldn't be able to grow to 10,000 and then, 20,000 brands because we'd still be trying to help these 3 brands who have a custom setup. So we just say no, thank you so much, and just keep, an open dialogue for when we are ready.
I think that's so interesting to take that perspective because I think a lot of founders, particularly if there was their first time going around building a business, you might latch onto that and be like, we just need to win any business that we can. And I think sometimes that's the struggle that we see is you then find out, wow, what I've really committed to here is great. I'm getting paid for it, but it's effectively a solutions design for a large retailer, for example. But that being said, I mean, if you think about the ambition of where you guys want to go, like, how do you think about going back to them and keeping them engaged? Because that's not something that you can, say we can service. Well, you might say we can service you today. We can't service you today, but we might be able to service you in 12 to 18 months. How do you stimulate engagement and keep them sort of interested in what you guys are doing?
I think we've been really lucky because they don't have an alternative solution. So I've been getting emails like...
They're checking in with you.
Yeah. Hey. that commerce tools integration, is that anywhere near like closer to the pipeline? And I'm like, no, mum, let's chat in 2 months. So I think we're fortunate in that respect. But I think it's around, staying focused on what your mission is and how you're going to get there. And if I customize a product for 3 people, I'm never going to be on the mission of powering profitable e-commerce businesses. I'm just going to help 3 institutional brands become more profitable, but not help the bulk of the industry, which is the goal.
I want to touch on a topic that I think that a lot of early stage founders listening will get value out of, and that is the fundraising process, which you ran. Now, I know that you referenced, right, Everton to Profit Peak moved rapidly, but as an outsider looking in, it would seem as if your fundraising process was deemed a success. Do you want to maybe talk through maybe that process and how you structured that process from the outset?
Sure. I think you can do it.
Probably, but that's not how it works though.
So I changed my LinkedIn profile to stealth mode while I was still running Everton, and it resulted in 3 of Australia's biggest venture capital funds reaching out to me and saying, hey, can we chat about what you're building in stealth? And that's when I thought, maybe this time I won't bootstrap, maybe I'll consider an alternative strategy to run this business. And then I joined the Blackbird Giants program, met Alex probably in the first week, and I met other investors like Rain Ong, and started just having conversations. And while we were having conversations, I was then getting other VC funds approaching me saying, hey, we've heard your name. Are you interested in coming to talk to us? And so I realized very quickly that the Australian VC community is very insular. They all talk, they all share. And all of a sudden it was spiraling into a round before I even knew I was definitely committed to raising venture capital funding. So yes, it was a very quick process.
When we first spoke, it was more about product, and then, I was kind of eventuating into January Capital. And from my perspective, you were very articulate in your pitch because you knew exactly the domain that you were speaking about, right? Were there any areas where you weren't feeling that confident as a part of the process, or that you were engaging with other people to try and get their thought process, or other founders or other investors who might have been kind of friends or colleagues, etc., to get some guidance, or you just ran it?
I just ran it. But also don't forget, I've come from a M&A background, having been at Credit Suisse. I've also seen my parents do a lot of M&A deals. So it wasn't like I was coming in fresh and not knowing anything about what a deal needs to look like, because I had done deals myself. So I knew what people wanted to see. And I would give people what they wanted. And that ultimately meant that they became interested. And one of the things I learned really quickly is if your own customers, like your early customers, are prepared to write a check, from an investor's perspective, it's like, well, hey, there must be something here if an early customer is prepared to write a check. So I think that was a really big advantage for us, that our first 2 customers wanted to write checks.
You're doing a lot, I think, with the wider community in Australia, giving guidance back to early stage founders, right? But what do you think makes a good pitch at the early stage?
It's all about the founder. And it's all about the founder's ability to storytell. And it all comes back to, do they really know the pain point? Do they know how to solve the pain point? And is it a pain point worth solving? Is it big enough? Like, if you're going to raise venture capital funding, it needs to be a big enough problem that it's worth solving on this scale. So I think if you can really tell your story with conviction, and build a rapport with investors in the community, they'll help you. Even if they say no, they'll say, but I know X, Y, and Z, and I reckon they'd be interested. And so I think people sometimes see investors in the venture capital community as like opponents or people they need to impress. But if you approach it as they're human, just ask, like I just asked you for help, most of them say, sure, I'm happy to help you. And it's just about being good people.
You had the fortunate ability to be able to select your investors. Not that everyone has that when they're raising their first round. we ask this question to a multitude of founders, some founders who are Series B, C, D onwards, about investor composition at the early stage and investor composition at the later stage. And because you're somewhat very much, it was only like the end of last year that this all transpired, still very recent in some ways, how do you think about selecting the right investors at the early stage to join you on that journey?
So I did my own DD. When you get the let's deep dive conversation from a lot of the investors, they send your way all their best references. And I was like, great, those references I know are going to be good. So again, I just set out asking people. So I approached people and said, hey, I saw you got funding from this venture capital fund. Tell me what you think about them. But I don't want you to tell me what they want you to tell me. Just tell me genuinely what you think. And just by asking, people tell. And people tell a lot. Like, there's a lot of transparency between founders. And so I basically approached it as, if they don't have any terrible references, because it was hard not to find even some lukewarm references, to be honest, on people. Also, if a founder hadn't been successful and they could give me a reference for the fund, that was like a double tick on my own DD. And then I was like, who do I not want to avoid? So who's going to call me and I say, oh yeah, I don't mind picking up the phone. Like, that was who I wanted to work with. Like, it was that basic. And then the list started to get a lot shorter when I started to think about who's going to call me and I'm going to want to run away. The list got really short.
That's good to know. I think, this is just my perspective, but you kind of jumped onto the scene in some ways. Like, you weren't a part of that wider early stage tech and VC ecosystem. You'd sort of had your time as an operator in e-commerce. And, again, as an outsider looking in, did an incredible job at an oversubscribed round for Profit Peak. But you've also really, really leaned in as, I guess, influencer is the wrong name, but a thought leader in some ways, not only for e-commerce, but I think now even for the early stage tech ecosystem. Do you want to maybe kind of talk through that in a little bit more detail?
Sure. So for other founders, it's really as simple as people help me on my journey. Yourself, you were very helpful. There were a lot of other people who were super helpful. So I was like, I'm going to make an effort to pay it forward because so many people helped me. And I think people forget to just ask, and I always say to people, if you get a no, you can change that no. Like, there's very few times I haven't in my life been able to change a no. And so I try to encourage people to try and change no's. And you never know that they may change. And no one remembers saying no to you, but you remember them saying no to you. So just ask. And so I've always encouraged people, just ask me. But then on the e-commerce side, I've just leaned into sharing what I've learned over the last decade. And it's a simple, people say, oh, do you spend hours or do you have a ghostwriter or any of this stuff? And I'm like, no, I literally spend 5 minutes throwing down on the page, quite literally, my thoughts that day on the industry. Like, it's that simple. Like, I may read Booktopia's latest press release and I'm exactly what I'm thinking as I'm reading it. I just literally type it into LinkedIn and then schedule it for the next morning. There's really no strategy or thought process other than what is happening in my own brain.
Interesting. So you're a female founder in the Australian ecosystem. You've sort of come into the venture capital-backed ecosystem. What's been the perception and the learning as you've started to be more involved in that with regards to female founder involvement, the way the ecosystem's set up? Is it set up for success today to be able to allow a female founder to go and raise institutional capital, or is that something that more work needs to be done?
Yeah, I think my position was very unique. I don't think my round was representative of other rounds led by female founders by any stretch of the imagination. However, every fund that I did speak with and engage with, there was always a female investor, at the table. And so it is becoming more female friendly from that perspective. But just because there's a female on the other side of the table doesn't mean you're any more investable. That's ultimately the case, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether it's a female or male on the other side of the table. You need to come with an investable business. And I think that there possibly is more learning to be done on how to storytell and what is an investable and not investable business. And I think that's for the whole founder community, male or female. But there's definitely unconscious bias. And I know some of the questions that I was asked when I was fundraising were not asked typically to male founders. Things like, oh, are you okay to take risk? And I was like, I have bootstrapped a business.
Really?
I know how to take risk. Like, bootstrap is my money. No LP's money. My money.
Yep.
My mortgage. I can take risk. Don't worry. And then I asked other founders, and I was like, were you ever asked how you felt about risk taking? And one was from Rainforest. He said to me, I've raised capital 3 or 4 times for a multitude of businesses as the CFO, and I was never asked about my ability to take risk. And I said, interesting.
Wow.
I was asked that quite often. So there is unconscious bias.
Yeah.
But I guess I was able to break through those with my own conviction in myself.
Yeah, interesting.
Let's do a bit of a gear shift now. And I think one of the areas that I had a lot of comfort in when we were talking initially, and also when we were moving through the investment process with Profit Peak, was just your ability for founder-led sales. I think we've talked at length about, your domain expertise, et cetera. But I think your ability to confidently, execute and engage with customers, I think is super interesting. And it's something that would be good to unpack, actually, and how you think through a founder-led sales process, especially as you're still somewhat finding product market fit yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I think it all comes back to like authenticity and genuine understanding for the position of the person you're selling to. And I think the problem with a lot of salespeople is that they're selling a software and they go into a conversation selling a software. Whereas I have a genuine conversation where I'm not trying to sell them Profit Peak, I'm trying to help them improve their business. And it just so happens Profit Peak does help you do that.
Nice.
And I think the fact that I use the software myself and it got a favorable outcome brings that level of, trust and authenticity to the conversation. It's not an unproven software. It's not an unproven method to profitability. It's proven. I've done it myself, and you can choose to try it or you don't have to. It's really as simple as that.
I do want to touch on, again, product market fit. And, we speak to a lot of early stage founders, and, whether product market fit is this mirage or it's an actual real thing. How will you, or how do you know if Profit Peak has hit product market fit?
I think there's a few different measures for it, and I don't think you ever have product market fit, and you will continue to have product market fit because the market with dynamics, whether it's macroeconomic environment or other businesses coming into the space, what is product market fit today is going to change 5 or 6 times over the next however many years. So I feel like you're constantly looking for product market fit. And maintaining product market fit. And for me, that is when customers are using your product, happily paying for it, telling other people that it's amazing, they should be using it. So referrals is a really good, strong sign. And I also think just genuinely getting something out of the software. So the software is not just sitting there as a nice to have. So we had a customer the other week say to us, your software is not a nice to have. It's now the lifeblood of our business. And I was like, can I put that on our website? That is a really good quote. So I think things like that to me are early signals of that customer love. And us not being something that's going to sit in the background, but really be embedded in the e-commerce business's workflows. Because if it's the lifeblood of their business, you can't turn off your lifeblood.
I think it's a really interesting time to be building a software company because you've got this paradigm shift around AI and ML that's coming. And we all know that if we project out over the next decade, there's going to be incredible efficiency gains from embedding of AI and ML into product. But if you speak to most buyers of software today, they're still very apprehensive to think about actually, fully going all in on AI and ML. The average CIO is still probably quite bearish on actually committing a huge amount of budget to that. As you guys think about the product and the opportunity that sits over there with AI and ML versus building for what clearly works today, how's that sort of tension sitting in terms of product development?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it comes back to what your core strength is in your product as well. So our core strength is not in building an AI product. So we're not going to ever probably look to build an AI product from the ground up, like engineer something ourselves.
Yep.
But as the industry becomes, more progressed, there's going to be more and more language learning models that we obviously can leverage
Yep.
to provide automation for our software. So I always feel that we're going to be very workflow data focused in terms of our core product, and then we will leverage an alternate company's solution to provide an AI benefit leveraging off the workflow processes that we are focused and embedded in and all the data that we've collected. So I almost feel like when you look at an AI business, they kind of, you got to see what are those three modes. Is one going to be AI as in like the actual engine building the language learning models, data, or workflows? And we sit in that data and workflow, but absolutely as we go down the automation path, we will leverage other people's AI.
I think we've touched on product and product market fit. I think what would be interesting to unpack a bit, especially at this early stage, is monetization and pricing. Because, you speak to early stage founders and there's so much adapting in the early days to customer feedback, etc. Just want to know your approach to how you think about pricing your solution. Do you foresee, changes to pricing? If so, what is that feedback that you're taking on board to make those changes and just the science behind that?
There is no science to pricing. It's the same in retail, right? Like I apply the same knowledge. Is what is your customer willing to pay? What are your unit economics? And then you find that perfect middle ground really between those two is where we've gotten to. And we've also been really conscious of in terms of if we're going to be charging our customers for something that's going to be boosting their profitability, we need to price accordingly. So we don't want to be a product priced off revenue if we're telling customers to shift their focus from revenue to profitability. So we've been very deliberate with our approach to how we're going to price our product and also where our costs are. So our costs are in the data point collection, the storage of all this data. So we're very focused on, okay, so if that is what our unit economics are, how do we price to level the playing field there and make sure that as we scale, we also get the benefits of that scale, and so do our customers. So we've been very much about usage-based pricing as a result, because as obviously the customers grow their database with us, our usage pricing goes up as well.
I want to talk a little bit about what you're hearing from customers, because e-commerce as an industry has had so much change in the last 5 or 6 years, right? And it's funny, I think, when we look at sort of e-commerce globally, there's actually more complexity and more fragmentation in many ways. So many channels now, so many ways to acquire customers. But then in the inverse, the software stack is probably going to a winner take most in some respects. Certain elements, the Shopify layer, right? The sort of shop builder layer, e-commerce marketing through email, for example. What are you hearing from customers in terms of how much standardization is there in the e-commerce software stack today, which is a benefit to you guys probably in the near term? And what are you hearing in terms of people's optimism around e-commerce as a channel, if they're omni-channel, for example?
Yeah, good question. So I think the first thing is, while there is a standardization towards, for example, Shopify as being your CMS, your content management system, what actually goes into that Shopify build is not a standardized process. There's some businesses can have anywhere between 10 and 100 plugins running at any given time in that Shopify environment to actually make it work.
Yep.
So there's a lot of complexity in the SaaS tech stack for an e-commerce business. And there's also a lot of complexity still in actually understanding how to run a business outside of the Shopify. So I think Shopify have really nailed their position. Clearly Meta, Klaviyo, TikTok, they're not going away, or Google. But there's no one really established in, okay, now how do we operate with this stack? And that's where we obviously come in. And there's no one really strong in that operation piece, because they've all just been focused on what else can I plug into this Shopify ecosystem to make the front end appear better. And that, again, is that real revenue push, that revenue focus that the market's been in and is shifting out of. And so there's been a huge shift in e-commerce away from saying, hey, let's just get revenue at all costs, and now let's lean into profitability and actually make sure we're building a sustainable business. And omni-channel businesses are clearly seeing as well the costs that they traditionally thought meant that an e-commerce business was cheaper to run than a physical bricks and mortar store. It's actually sometimes not the case. And so they're also laser focused on, if we're going e-commerce, how do we keep it profitable? And again, that's where we come in. So we can solve the problem for both a native e-commerce operator and an omni-channel business going e-com.
What's your broader views? I guess an expansion of that, right, is, the broader view of Australia as an e-commerce market. We spend a lot of time thinking through on our end, like on the Asia landscape for commerce. And it's very different, obviously, as you would know, to Australia with the kind of proliferation and heritage of marketplaces. Australia has had a heritage of very strong D2C. But what do you think the next kind of 5-10 years in the Australian e-commerce landscape look like?
Cool question. I think there's going to be consolidation for sure of brands. There is definitely going to be brands who are coming up and are going to stay strong, but there's also going to be brands that are going to fall away, especially with tight lending at the moment. So a lot of brands are really struggling to get new product, for example, because they can't get lending on the back of it. And some of the lenders outside of Shopify themselves have actually gone under themselves in the market. So I think that's going to cause a lot of stress over the next probably 12 to 24 months for a lot of e-commerce brands. But I also think it's going to be an opportunity for upcoming brands to then fill those gaps. So I think e-commerce is going to continue to grow, but I think there's going to be more of an omni-channel approach. I think a lot of e-commerce businesses realize that there's an opportunity to lower CAC online by having a physical presence. And I think the best way to actually test that is to not go and sign a massive lease in Westfield by any stretch of the imagination, but go and do a pop-up store. If Westfield a month out from Christmas has an empty store, they're going to lease it to you for 1 month on a very, very cheap lease. Go and do that and just see if there's a test case for it and you can actually make the numbers work. And I think that's what's great about e-commerce is that you don't have to go crazy with your investment straight out the gate. You don't have to sign a massive lease like you would if you were setting up a retail store. And so apply those same principles to testing if you should go omni-channel.
I think as we look to wrap up, if there are any kind of other war stories or learnings or words of advice for early stage founders that are listening, what would they be? I
would say whatever you're building, build with good people. Because shit hits the fan. It does. It doesn't matter how good your business is, you have bad moments, and often those bad moments are where you just need to look around the room and find someone who you can actually trust to have the conversation with. So I think if you've got good people around you, you can have those conversations, and I think it's really important. And I think one of the things I find really annoying about the venture capital industry is this celebration of raising money. That's why I never announced my round, because that's to me not a celebration. It's a milestone, it's an achievement, sure, but you are not guaranteed a successful business just because you could raise money. And I don't think raising money should be a celebration point. I think what should be a celebration is each of those milestones you hit on your building journey. When you hit that, customer love, when you hit that 100 customer mark, when you hit that 10,000 customer mark, when you hit that IPO, those are moments to celebrate, not when you get your first check.
Excellent. Carla, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Pleasure.
Thank you.